about time to get started here, a little bit after 9. We'll wait a couple more minutes, get everybody in here. Have a seat. How's everybody doing with the hot weather? You know, I've had melanoma cancer, so the doctor told me you have to cover up. You got to stay out of the sun. And if you're in the sun, you got to cover up. So I got this big hat on, and I've got a long sleeve shirt on, and I've got long pants, and I've got sunglasses, and I've got gloves on. And next to me, my neighbor's doing his lawn in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. Man, I wish I could do that. Okay, this morning we're going to be dealing with some things on the Sermon on the Mount that can be pretty controversial in our culture. And one of the things I said about the Sermon on the Mount when we first started was that what Jesus taught was absolutely countercultural for his time. And you know what? Things don't change. It's still countercultural for our time. And that just tells me that God's Word is eternal. It's good any place, any time, any culture, anywhere. So this morning we're going to be looking at where Jesus talks about adultery, Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 through 30. This is the second command we're looking at that Jesus addressed. It's the command concerning adultery here. And you know, just as the prohibition against murder included angry thoughts and your insulting word, the prohibition against adultery includes that lustful look in the imagination. So Jesus here, again, is when he told us earlier that your righteousness has to exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees. This is what he's doing in these different things he's talking about. This is how your righteousness is supposed to exceed theirs by what he's talking about. And what he's talking about, he's getting to the heart. He's getting to the mind, not just the actions. And that's what he does throughout this whole thing here. You know, we can commit murder with our thoughts and words. That's what Jesus says. And we can commit adultery with our hearts and our minds. So let's go ahead and read that. Okay. Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, 'Do not commit adultery.' But I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Now, we have to look at what the word look lustfully means. This is not just a normal, seeing a pretty woman and recognizing that and then moving on. This is more than that. This is having lustful desires to continue with that. That's what Jesus is talking about. Now, I want to say here, it's important to realize that Jesus, he's not talking about the natural, normal desire, which is part of our human nature, that he put into us. God created sex. It's not dirty. It's not evil, except when taken out of its created purpose. That's when it becomes bad. And God knows how wonderful and powerful human sexuality can be. But he also knows when it's taken out of its context, it can have physical effects, emotional effects, and social and spiritual well-being effects on people. So that's why God gave us everything he gave us on managing our sexual desires in our life. There's a term we use here, it's in our culture. It's called casual sex. Well, you know, that's what's going on in our culture right now. There is no such thing as casual sex, though, for Christians. Unless you're married, of course. But anyway, there's so much of it in the movies, so much of it in the things that we watch, so much of it online, much of it on our phone, so much of it. It's just all over the place. And I think you can see it develop over the years. For example, what kind of television programs and commercials have you noticed as you have watched television lately that aim right at this, what we're talking about? They aim right at calling things good that God has called bad. What have you seen? I mean, sometimes Nadine and I are sitting there, and we are watching a show, and then you get this commercial where you got two men kissing. You know, why didn't you just throw it in our face, right? That's what's going on in our culture around here. So we have to be aware of what our culture is like. It's a real serious matter to give oneself sexually to another person, because sex is more than just a physical act, isn't it? It has more to do with the one flesh concept that God talked about. That's where you become one in mind, soul, and spirit. Become one physically, emotionally, socially, and spiritual well-being. And when Jesus used the word one flesh, and when you go back to Genesis, he talks one flesh. Sometimes we think, okay, we get married, we become one flesh, and that's the end of it, right? I've seen and learned that becoming one flesh with your spouse is a lifetime process in thinking, emotions, all that. You just don't get married, you're one flesh automatically. You are, but that's an area that you have to grow in. You have to grow in. No one can deny how that at the times we live in, this is a much bigger challenge for us right now. And, we have discussions and people say, oh yeah, this has always been a problem. Yeah, it has been. You go back to the Roman Empire and some of the other civilizations that basically fell, and one of the reasons they fell was because of sexual immorality. And the historians and the anthropologists will tell you that. Now, I'm going to quote one here in a minute that's done a lot of studies of about 86 different cultures, and he's pointed some things out that makes you realize that Jesus and God knew what they were talking about. Read the Bible about this. If you get a new car, you read the manual. I'm just saying, read the manual. Our Maker knows how we ought to live and how we ought to work. Okay. Now, one of the things you want to add to everything we're seeing in our culture here is all the advertisements and proliferation and availability of sexual, explicit, deviant behavior on television shows and movies, and I've already talked a little bit about that. Tragically, in the midst of all this, righteousness and holiness is being lost in our culture. It's being lost. And God's wonderful plan for marriage and sexual fulfillment are being traded for loose living, recreational sex, and all these alternative lifestyles that we have now in our country, in our culture. And wanted to talk about pornography for a minute, because this is a big thing in our culture. And when I was still working as a counselor, a therapist for the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, I handled and kind of took care of the employee assistance program for the university. So what we did is we offered therapy and counseling to all employees and their families of the university. And I had university up here, it was my area, and some other places. Glenda Davis worked with me for a while too, several years in that office. And we saw a lot. Where was I going with that? Okay, anyway, pornography. I was also certified as a drug and alcohol counselor for the state. And so I helped a lot of people that were dealing with addictions. I got people into places where they could get help for their addictions. And, you can get addicted to alcohol. You can get addicted to drugs. I work with plenty of people in those areas. You can get addicted to gambling. You got Gamblers Anonymous and all those anonymous groups for these different types of things. And you can get addicted to pornography. And some of the studies show that just like alcoholism and drug addiction changes the chemistry of the brain, same thing is true for pornography. It changes the chemistry of the brain, which makes it much harder to recover from any of that. It takes real serious treatment. And I've seen people come in with addictions. I've seen these addictions ruin marriages. I've seen it hurt people. I've just seen a lot of that. And I grew up in a family where there was an addiction to alcohol with my father. And so I've seen a lot. But, there's something that I've been reading some things on culture, and I came across this book entitled, let's see, do you have that? Okay. Historian and anthropologist, J.D. Unwind, he studied 86 different cultures, civilizations, in an effort to determine which facts accounted for their disintegration. And his conclusion was, every society has one or two choices, either sexual promiscuity and decline or resale, restraint, and growth. Now, you see his quote up there. This is one of the things that he came up with in all his research. Would you say that we as a country are in an area or at a time of sexual freedom? Everything goes? Okay. And he studied all this in different cultures. And what he says is, if total sexual freedom was embraced by a culture, that culture collapsed within 3 generations to the lowest state of flourishing, which Unwin describes as inert and at a dead level of conception, and is characterized by people who have little interest in much else other than their own wants and needs. At this level, the culture is usually conquered or taken over by another culture with greater social energy. That was just one of his quotes. Now, he mentioned the word flourishing, and this is not up here, but I'm going to go ahead and read it anyway. What is a culture? What does he mean by a flourishing culture? The most powerful combination of prenuptial chastity, that means no sex before marriage, coupled with absolute monogamy. Rationalist cultures that retained this combination for at least 3 generations exceeded all other cultures in every area, including literature, art, science. They got furniture in there, that's interesting. Architecture, engineering, and agriculture. Only 3 out of 86 cultures studied ever attained this level. So what is he saying? He's saying that our sexual mores, things we practice in our culture, are affecting us. And if you go back and you study the fall of the Roman Empire, and he's studied all these, he looked at them, one of the things that contributed to their disintegration was their sexual values. It was one of the things that was always there. And he said it's almost like monotonous continuity. That's what he said. He called it that, monotonous continuity. He saw it in every culture he studied. So I think it's very interesting, and I wanted to bring that out to you because God doesn't give us these ways to live without knowing what's best for us. And now you have studies that can show when we deviate from that, things start to go down. Okay, I thought that was an interesting quote. So he says, every society has two choices, either sexual promiscuity, I've already read that, okay. So the conclusion here, this should certainly concern us as we think about the choices that we make and the choices we are making as a nation and as a culture. Now, I talked about the commercials earlier and what they're putting out there for us in the porno industry. We have to be aware of that, and you have even our government. I've said this before. Even our government is legislating this type of behavior as normal and okay. And if you speak against it, guess what you're accused of? Hate speech. So I think that's something that's interesting too. Now, what's particularly important here, well, let's get back to us, okay. It's easy to reserve all of our concern for others, but we really should be most concerned about ourselves with this. You know, while we never might literally or physically stray from our marriages, Jesus is concerned here. He says that we might do so in our hearts and in our minds, which could lead to the real thing. And those who do so in their hearts and minds can pave the way to do it overtly. Now, according to the literal meaning of the Greek in this, the man who is condemned, or the woman who is condemned, as far as that goes, is one who looks at a woman or another man with deliberate intention of lusting. That's what Jesus is talking about here. That's not like you see somebody pretty, somebody that's pretty sexual looking, and you go, oh, okay, and then you go on. That's normal. What he's talking about is continuing in a lustful attitude towards that. Now, what's particularly interesting here is that Jesus makes a correlation between your eyes and your heart. What you look at. Your eyes and your heart, what you look at. So in the next two verses, oh, excuse me, I'm not there yet, sorry. Jesus gives us some very practical instructions about how to maintain sexual purity. And in essence, what Jesus is teaching here is that heart adultery is the result of eye adultery. That's one way to look at it. And the only way to deal with the problem is at the beginning. You know, Job got this connection. The righteous man, Job, he understood this. When his friends were talking to him, oh, you've sinned. You must have done something. Job says this in Job chapter 1, chapter 31, verse 1, and he talks about it more in 7 and 8. But Job said, I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a girl. He says, if my heart has been led by my eyes, or if my hands have been defiled. He says he's made a covenant with his eyes not to look lustfully at a girl. So Job understood that control of his heart was due to control of his eyes, what he was looking at. And, we talked about the Talmud earlier and some of the teachings of the Pharisees in the Talmud, and they even recognize this connection. I just want to share this with you. It might be a little bit funny, but it's actually what the Jews were teaching, what they taught. There were 7 types of Pharisees that they talked about, and they go into a description of each and every one of them. And one of the types was called the bruised and the bleeding Pharisee. This is in the Talmud. You can go read it. Well, what was that? Well, this was one who would close his eyes if women were near or came near so they wouldn't look at him. They would close their eyes anywhere. So they would fall downstairs. They would run into doors. They would get injured. And people would see them all bruised up and beat up. Oh, what a virtuous person. He's closing his eyes. And this is exactly what they were saying. But, now next week, I don't expect a whole bunch of you to come in with a bunch of bruises and stuff, because you've run into a door or fallen down some stairs or something. But anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting. And our responsibility to be careful about what we see and what we do with the image that we have viewed. We just have to be very careful. And in this culture, it is very difficult. Very difficult. You can't turn anything on without seeing something like that. But also, I think I would be remiss here if I didn't mention, and this is something that has come up in the church all the way back, if I didn't mention that we as Christians must be careful on how we dress. How we dress. For we can present ourselves in ways that make lust a greater challenge for others. I think that's very important. And this goes back a long time ago, Right now you go to camp, what do you have? Separate swimming for women and men, right? I could see that. I don't have a problem with that. But we have to be careful about how we dress, and that includes guys. Now, I was around when the first miniskirt came out. You older people, you remember that? How many of you remember when the first miniskirts come out? Raise your hand. Okay. Yeah. I was around then. I'm 75, almost 76, so I've been around for a while. And then next thing you know, after the miniskirt was the two-piece bathing suit. And then you had, past the two-piece bathing suit, you had the bikini. And it just steadily increases. Now, and it seems like the research will show us that men seem to be more of a challenge. This seems to be more of a challenge for men than females, the visual stimulation. Not all, but mostly it is. So the prescription that Jesus offered is a radical one. Let's go to Matthew chapter 5, verses 29 through 30. Have that up there. He says, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go to hell. You know, Jesus says something shocking here by saying that one should rid himself or herself of the offending part, whatever that is. Pluck out the eye, cut off the offending hand or the foot. Of course, we know these words that Jesus is speaking here, we don't take them literal. They are dramatic figures of speech, but he's making a point, isn't he? What Jesus was advocating here was not literal physical self-maiming, but he was not talking about mutilization here. He was talking about more or less mortification, killing that, not letting it grow, killing it. So he says, if your eyes cause you to sin, stop looking at the things that lead to lust. If your hand causes you to sin, stop doing the things that lead to sin. If your foot causes you to sin, stop going to the place that leads to sin. So what he's saying here, this is what Jesus is saying in our language. He says, don't look, don't do, and don't go. Behave as if you have plucked out your eye or cut off your hand or your foot. Now, there is in treatment, when you're treating a person, and I've worked with people with alcohol, drugs, even some people came in with porno addiction. One of the things, some of the language of treatment for people is, before they would go out the door, I would say, all right now, so-and-so, you need to watch your people, places, and things. Watch your people, places, and things. Why did I say that? Well, don't hang around the people that are contributing to your addiction and causing you trouble. Don't go to the same places you used to go to. They haven't heard that. And you might have to change some things in your life that contributed to your addiction. And I like to look at this in a way, we are all in recovery from sin, aren't we? So all these things that we work with people that have addictions in are good for us because we are all in sin and we are all in recovery. So no judgment there. We have to realize that. So, we got to watch our people, places, and things, don't we? Got to watch that. Jesus made it quite clear that it's better to lose one member and enter life maimed than to retain the whole body and go to hell. There are some things in life, if we're going to practice this, that we're just going to have to amputate from our lives. There are some things in life that we're going to have to just ignore, just amputate it from our lives. It's better to accept amputation of some aspects of this world than to risk final destruction in the next. And our culture is pushing us in that direction. Certainly is. Now let me clarify one thing here. I want to say it's not our right to lay down laws and man-made rules to help us manage this. About what you see, what you read, where you go. We shouldn't be making laws about that. But what we can do is we have the right and the liberty to say what Jesus said. If your eye causes you to sin, don't look. If your foot causes you to sin, don't go. If your hand causes you to sin, don't do it. So to obey Jesus and to be righteous is going to involve a certain amount of elimination of things in our life. And for some of us, the amount of television we watch, the programs we watch, and these things, they've been sneaking up on us in television and on the phone and different things. They're they started gradually putting them in there, and now they're just out in our faces. So we have to be very careful with that. So to obey Jesus, to be righteous, is going to involve a certain amount of elimination in our lives. Talking about what is talked about making rules. Now, part of the way I was raised was we went to the beach all the time. Dad was stationed down in Miami, Florida, and we started out growing up. We went to the beach all the time, and continued to go to the beach. And sometimes we still will go to the beach on a vacation or something and walk the beach. And that might be bad for some people because you got a lady coming up here in a bikini or just walking on the beach, whoa, I'm not used to that. Well, I was kind of raised around it, so for me, I can go to the beach and that doesn't bother me. Other people, it would. But you can't make a law that says you can't go to the beach because you might see something there. If that's bad for you, don't go. If it's okay, with me, it wasn't that bad because I was raised around it and kind of brought up in it. I don't know if that's an excuse or not, but I'm just saying it didn't bother me all that much. Maybe I became, what's the word? Used to it or something. But we have to be careful about that. But here's the thing. It's what Paul said in Ephesians 5:3. But among you there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality or any kind of impurity or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Now he says there, not even a hint. That's pretty restrictive, isn't it? Not even a hint. And that's what we have to practice. Okay. Here's a few general tips for tackling these temptations that we have. Don't entertain. Question, how do we keep from entertaining the temptation? Think about that one. Cut off its source. Question, what practical actions can we take to cut off its source? Remember the consequences. Question, how does this help? How does it not help? So, in conclusion to this part of it, real righteousness surpasses the letter of the law. So he said, don't murder. Well, hey, watch your anger, because that's what's going to lead to it. And then he says, don't insult. Now watch that. And he said, well, don't lust, because that's going to lead to something else. Could lead to adultery. Now, I want to ask you a question. We've been studying the Beatitudes, and these are a further extension of the Beatitudes. Jesus, when he said at the end of Matthew about his relationship to the law, he said at the end, your righteousness must exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. So what is he saying? What he's doing now, he is describing that. He's telling us what that looks like by the things that we've been talking about. So which beatitude, thinking about what the Beatitudes mean, which beatitude do you think this one refers back to when you're thinking about the Beatitudes? Huh?
Thirst after righteousness.
Can't hear you.
The one about seeking righteousness.
Okay. Hungering and thirst for righteousness. That's what's right in this situation. This is what God wants. It refers back to that one. What other one? You're talking about, making sure what you think and what you feel matches what you think. Pure in heart. Yeah, this one relates back to being pure in heart. This is one of the things that Jesus says, he's illustrating. This is what pure in heart looks like. And remember, and we go through the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, he is talking further about each one of those Beatitudes, and he's giving more detail on them as he goes through them. What other one do you think it might refer back to? Let's see here. Relates back to pure in heart. Pure in heart meant what? You remember our study? Undivided, loyal, totally faithful. That's what pure in heart means. Just summary here, looks at a woman lustfully. That's not a passing glance, but a willful, calculated stare that arouses sexual desire. That's what he's talking about here. According to Jesus, this is a form of adultery, even if it is only in the heart. Again, Jesus here is getting to the root of these problems. And as I've already pointed out, this strikes at the problem of pornography in our society. Okay, any comments, any questions? We're done with that part of this lesson. We get 9:38 here. Yeah, Glenda.
I just want everybody to know that I have a certification in sexual addiction.
Okay, yeah.
I got that extra training after I realized how many couples I was seeing that was one of the main issues.
Yeah, and I remember that. We were still working together when you were working on getting that certification. And Glenda said she has a certification in dealing with sexual addiction, because we were seeing so many people come in where that was just destroying people, destroying marriages and everything. So she's got that background. Now, I have a background in drug and alcohol treatment. I'm also was an LPC. I did a lot of marital counseling and different, depression, different types of counseling for the university system there. But Glenda has an expertise in that area. And I had an expertise in drug and alcohol area also. Now, I'm not licensed anymore. After we retired, people said, you're going to keep going getting your hours, your CEU hours and all that, and doing all this stuff and doing all that stuff. Do you still want to? I think they were trying to get me to go into a practice with them too after we retired, and we were looking at doing sojourning. So I thought about for a while, and I said, you know what? I've had enough of this. I think I'll do something else. So that's what we did. But I'm as serious as I can be about this. This is a very sensitive subject, and we need to work on it. And Jesus has given us this Sermon on the Mount. I mean, this is powerful. You get into it, you study it. It fits any culture, any time, anywhere. Because the same problems man has had from the garden, we are having now, aren't we? Same thing. Nothing's changed. Solomon said nothing new under the earth. It's not. It's really not. Okay, anything else? Well, we got about 5 minutes left. I guess we can just fellowship for a while. Now, the next one we're going to be looking at is divorce. That's going to be a real one to deal with here next week. So I'll just spend some time on that next week as we go through the Sermon on the Mount. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your time. I hope this has been valuable for you. Let's talk.